You hear the stories. A longship's dragon prow cuts through the mist, horned helmets, brutal raids, an axe falls. But what happens when the axe is stayed? What happens when the Viking warlord stands before a throne, and on that throne sits a queen who looks him in the eye and says, "No. No surrender. No marriage. No peace." For a woman of power in the Norse world, death in battle was an honorable end. The sagas are clear. What came after refusal was something else entirely. It was a strategy of political and psychological warfare, designed to be worse than a clean death. It was the complete erasure of a person, a lineage, and a people's hope, all while the victim was forced to watch. This isn't a story about myth. This is a story from the chronicles, from the law codes, and from the frozen earth. It's the story of what happened to the women who ruled, who fought East, and who refused to kneel. If you value documented history from the Norse era, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. The information in this script is grounded in primary sources like Snorri Sturluson's 12th century Heimskringla, which compiled the oral histories of Norwegian kings and is cross-referenced with modern archaeological analysis, such as the groundbreaking DNA work on Viking era remains published in the journal Nature in 2020. Now back to the information. First, you must understand the prize. To a Viking king, a conquered queen was not just a person. She was a symbol. She held the legitimacy of her land in her blood. To marry her, by force or otherwise, was to absorb that legitimacy. Her children, now his children, would have an undisputed claim to the throne. Her refusal was not just a personal insult, it was a rejection of this transfer of power. It was a political statement that her line would not be broken and absorbed. And for that, the consequences had to be absolute. They had to be a public lesson. The first story comes from the kingdom of Agder, in what is now southern Norway, in the early 9th century. Here ruled King Harald Grenraud, or Harold Redbeard. His daughter was Princess Åsa. She was famously beautiful and famously intelligent. Across the water in Vestfold, a king named Gudrid the Hunter heard of her. He was a man known for his ambition and his brutality. He sent a delegation to Agder, demanding Åsa's hand in marriage. Her father, King Harold, refused. He would not give his daughter to such a man. For Gudrid, this was not a negotiation. It was an act of war. He gathered his ships, an entire fleet, and sailed for Agder in the dead of night. His men stormed the coast, silent and fast. They surprised King Harold's forces completely. The fighting was short and bloody. Gudrid himself cut down King Harold. He then hunted down and killed Harold's son, Gerd. With the king and the heir dead, the kingdom was broken. Gudrid's men looted the royal hall, taking gold, silvers, and livestock. But Gudrid only wanted one thing. He found Princess Åsa, and he took her. He forced her onto his ship and sailed back to Vestfold. There, he held a feast and compelled her to marry him. This was her fate, worse than death. She was now the wife of the man who slaughtered her father and her brother. She was forced to share a bed with him, to run his household, to bear him children. She gave birth to a son, Halfdan, who would later be known as Halfdan the Black. For an entire year, she lived this life. She played the part of the dutiful queen, she smiled at feasts, she managed the servants, but Snorri Sturluson, writing in the Heimskringla, tells us she never forgot. A year after the birth of her son, Queen Åsa made her move. One night, after a great feast, King Gudrid was drunk. He was stumbling back to his chambers, escorted by his men. A servant, a man loyal to Åsa, approached him. The man held a long spear. In the darkness and confusion, he drove it straight through the king. Gudrid the Hunter was dead. Åsa immediately took her 1-year-old son, Halfdan, and all the wealth she could carry, and fled back to her own kingdom of Agder. There, she took back control. She raised her son not as a prince of Vestfold, but as the rightful heir of Agder, the grandson of the king Gudrid had murdered. She ruled as regent for nearly 2 decades, a queen in her own right. She had endured the ultimate humiliation, but she turned her survival into a weapon. Her son, Halfdan the Black, would go on to unite several petty kingdoms, and his son, Harald Fairhair, would become the first king of a united Norway. Åsa's revenge was not swift, it was cold, patient, and absolute. She used the son forced upon her to reclaim and surpass the power that was stolen from her family. For decades, many believed she was one of the 2 women found in the Oseberg ship burial, an astonishingly rich grave discovered in Vestfold, the very kingdom where she was held captive. The ship, buried around the year 834, is a testament to the immense power a woman could hold. While modern analysis published in the journal Antiquity back in 2008 makes the direct identification with Åsa unlikely due to refined dating, The grave proves that women of near supreme status existed in the world she inhabited. It shows us what she was fighting to reclaim. Not all queens were victims. Not all queens were conquered. In the late 9th century, while Osa's grandson Harold Fairhair was forging Norway, England was burning. The great heathen army had torn through the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia had all fallen. Only Wessex, under King Alfred the Great, held out. But Alfred had a daughter. Her name was Ethelfled, and she would not be a prize for any northern king. She married Ethelred, the ruler of the western part of Mercia that remained free. But when her husband's health failed, she took command. She became the Lady of the Mercians. From the year 911, Ethelfled waged a relentless war of reconquest against the Danish Vikings who controlled the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw, a confederation of towns: Lincoln, Stamford, Leicester, Derby, and Nottingham. She was not a queen who waited behind stone walls. She was a master strategist and military engineer. The Mercian Register, a part of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, documents her campaign year by year. In 912, she built a fortress at Bridgenorth, sealing off a crossing on the River Severn. In 913, she fortified Tamworth, her capital, and Stafford, blocking the Trent Valley. In 914, she fortified Edisbury and Warwick. In 915, Cherbury and Runcorn. Each fortress, or burh, was a dagger pointed at the heart of the Danelaw. She was building a cage of wood and earth around her enemies. The Vikings watched this network grow. They saw their ability to raid and move freely choked off. In 917, she struck. She launched a full-scale assault and captured the fortress of Derby. The chronicle states that 4 of her thanes, who were dear to her, were killed within the gates. It was a bloody victory, but a victory nonetheless. The psychological shock was immense. Derby was not just a military base, it was one of their 5 great political centers. The next year, 918, she moved against Leicester, and the Viking army there surrendered to her without a fight. Shortly after, the leaders of the Viking kingdom of York, one of the most powerful in England, sent her envoys. They offered her pledges and oaths that they would be under her rule. They were ready to surrender their kingdom not to a king, but to her, a woman. To the warrior culture of the Danelaw Vikings, this was a humiliation worse than death. To be defeated in battle by a man was one thing. To be so completely outmaneuvered, so systematically dismantled by a woman that you offered her your kingdom was another. Ethelfled didn't use forced marriage as a weapon. She used fortifications, logistics, and iron-willed strategy. She died suddenly in Tamworth just weeks after the submission of York, in June of 918. Had she lived, she might have become Queen of all England before any man. She shows what happened when a queen refused to be a pawn and instead became the player. The Vikings in Mercia didn't get to inflict a fate worse than death. They received one. If you value these deep dives into the raw facts of the past, hit that subscribe button. It ensures we can keep digging into the archives and the archaeology to bring you these stories. Also, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Our research for these stories comes from academic works like Claire Downham's Viking Kings of Britain and Ireland, which meticulously reconstructs the political landscape of the era, and from direct engagement with primary sources like the Russian Primary Chronicle, which gives us an unparalleled, if biased, window into the world of the Eastern Vikings. Back to the story. The story of defiance and revenge reaches its most brutal crescendo not in Scandinavia or England, but in the vast forests of the East, in the land that would become Russia. Here, Norsemen known as the Rus ruled over Slavic tribes from their stronghold in Kiev. In the year 945, the ruler of the Kievan Rus, Igor, traveled to the lands of a subject tribe, the Drevlians. He was collecting tribute. According to the Byzantine chronicler Leo the Deacon, Igor's greed was his undoing. After collecting the regular payment, he decided it wasn't enough and went back for more with only a small retinue. The Drevlians were enraged. The Russian Primary Chronicle reports their words: "If a wolf comes to the sheep, he will take away the whole flock one by one unless he be killed." They ambushed Igor outside their capital of Iskorostan. They captured him and subjected him to a horrific death. They bent down 2 birch trees, tied them to his legs, and then let the trees spring back, tearing him apart. With Igor dead, the Drevlians saw an opportunity. They sent a delegation of their 20 best men to Kiev. Their proposal was delivered to Igor's widow, Olga. She was now the regent for her young son, Sviatoslav. The Drevlians proposed that she marry their prince, Mal. This was the classic conqueror's move, only in reverse. They had killed the king and now sought to absorb his power by marrying his queen. They expected her to be a frightened, powerless widow. They were wrong. Olga greeted their ambassadors with a chilling calm. She told them she was pleased with their proposal. She said they should return to their boat and wait. The next day, she would have them carried in honor to her court. The Drevlians, puffed up with pride, did as she asked. The next morning, the people of Kiev carried them in their boat through the city, but they did not carry them to the palace. They carried them to a deep trench that Olga had ordered dug the night before, and they threw the boat, with the 20 ambassadors still in it, into the trench and buried them alive. As the earth fell, the chronicle says Olga bent over the pit and asked them if they found the honor to their liking. She then sent a message to the Drevlians. She told them she accepted the proposal, but that they must send their most distinguished men to escort her to their prince, so her arrival would be worthy of her station. The Drevlians, unaware of the fate of their first delegation, sent a party of their best chieftains and nobles. When they arrived, Olga commanded that a bathhouse be prepared for them to wash before meeting her. The Drevlian lords entered the bathhouse. Olga's soldiers bolted the doors from the outside and set it on fire. They were all burned alive, but she was not finished. She sent another message to the Drevlians. "Us, I am now coming to you," it said. "Prepare great quantities of mead in the city where you killed my husband, that I may weep over his grave and hold a funeral feast for him." The Drevlians, still unsuspecting, did as she commanded. Olga arrived with a small group of soldiers and went to Igor's tomb. She wept. Then the feast began. She encouraged the Drevlians to drink. When they were completely drunk and incapacitated, she gave a signal. Her soldiers drew their swords and, according to the chronicle, massacred 5,000 of them. The survivors fled back to their cities. Olga pursued them with her main army. She laid siege to their capital, Iskorostan, for a year, but could not take it. So she resorted to cunning. She sent a message to the city, saying she had exacted enough revenge. She asked only for a small tribute to show their submission: 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house. The exhausted and starving Drevlians eagerly agreed. They gathered the birds and sent them to Olga. That night, Olga ordered her soldiers to attach a piece of sulfur bound with cloth to each bird's leg. At dusk, they lit the sulfur and released the birds. The pigeons and sparrows flew back to their nests in the eaves, the coops, and the thatches of Iskorostan. The entire city went up in flames. As the people fled the burning city, Olga's army was waiting. They captured the city elders and killed many of the others, giving the rest as slaves to her followers. Olga of Kiev refused to be the surrendered queen. Instead, she became a force of nature, a bringer of a fate so devastatingly complete it was written into the foundation myth of a nation. Sometimes, the defiance was not against a foreign king, but against one's own people, far from home in a place of extreme isolation and pressure. This is the story of Freydis Eiriksdottir, the illegitimate daughter of Eric the Red, the founder of the Norse settlement in Greenland. Her story takes place around the year 1010, in the new, strange land the Norse called Vinland, on the coast of North America. The saga of the Greenlanders tells us of an expedition she joined, a joint venture with 2 brothers from Iceland, Helgi and Finnbogi. They agreed to share the profits equally, each party taking 1 ship with a crew of 30 men. From the start, Freydis was deceptive. She secretly brought 5 more men than was agreed. In Vinland, they settled at the old camp built by her brother, Leif Erikson. Freydis insisted the Icelandic brothers build their own longhouse. Tensions simmered through the winter. The 2 camps were separated. A small, isolated pocket of Europeans on a vast, unknown continent. Freydis decided she wanted the brothers' ship, which was larger than hers, and all their wealth. She concocted a plan. One morning, she went to the brothers' longhouse barefoot, wearing only a cloak. She told Finnbogi she wanted to trade ships. He agreed. But when she returned to her own camp, her cold and wet feet were a deliberate part of her deception. She told her husband, Thorvard, that the brothers had beaten and mistreated her. She played the victim, shaming him, telling him he was a coward if he did not avenge her honor. She threatened to divorce him on the spot if he refused. Thorvard, enraged and manipulated, roused his men. They went to the other longhouse while everyone was sleeping. They seized and bound all the men, leading them out one by one and killing them. Every man from the brothers' crew was executed, but there was a problem. The crew included 5 women. Thorvard's men refused to kill them. It was a line they would not cross. The Grenlandinga saga gives the cold, brutal detail. Freydis said, "Hand me an axe." They gave it to her, and she, personally, killed all 5 women. It was a stunning act of brutality, even by saga standards. She had not been threatened. Her life was not in danger. Her actions were driven by pure greed and ruthless ambition. She swore her men to secrecy. threatening to kill anyone who spoke of what happened when they returned to Greenland, but word eventually leaked out. Her brother Leif heard the story. The saga says he was disgusted, but could not bring himself to give Freydis the punishment she deserved. Instead, he cursed her, saying that he foresaw that her descendants would never prosper. In the claustrophobic world of a tiny colony thousands of miles from home, Freydis refused to be a partner. She refused to share. Her defiance of the norms of her own society created a horror story that was remembered for centuries, a warning about the darkness that could emerge at the edge of the known world, inside one of their own. Her victims were not enemy warriors. They were her business partners. The place where these events may have unfolded, L'Anse-aux-Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, is now a World Heritage Site. The outlines of the sod longhouses are still visible, a quiet, windswept testament to the only authenticated Norse settlement in North America. Standing there, you can feel the profound isolation that must have bred the kind of paranoia and greed that drove Freydis to her terrible acts. For centuries, our image of the powerful woman of the Viking Age was filtered through these stories. She was the victim-turned-avenger like Ossa, the brilliant general like Ethelfled, the monstrous killer like Olga or Freydis. She was always exceptional. But what if she wasn't? What if a woman holding ultimate military authority was not an aberration, but a possibility written into the culture itself? For more than a century, the answer lay sleeping under the earth at the great Viking trading town of Birka in Sweden. In the 1870s, archaeologists excavated a grave there known as BJ 581. It was one of the most magnificent warrior graves ever found. The person inside was buried sitting up. On a terrace overlooking the town's garrison, they were interred with a breathtaking arsenal: a sword, an axe, a sax knife, a spear, armor-piercing arrows, 2 shields, and the remains of 2 horses, one saddled and bridled. In their lap was a full set of Hnafatafl game pieces, a board game of strategy. For over 140 years, this was held up as the textbook example of a high-status Viking commander, a man, a chieftain, the epitome of the Viking warrior ideal, but there were doubts. The skeleton's bone structure was slender. Some osteologists over the years suggested it might be female. These suggestions were largely dismissed. It was assumed a mistake had been made, that bones from another grave had been mixed in. A high-ranking field commander could not have been a woman. It simply did not fit the story we told ourselves. Then, in 2017, a team of researchers from Stockholm and Uppsala universities decided to end the debate. They extracted DNA from a tooth and an arm bone. The results were published in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology. They were unambiguous. The skeleton had 2 X chromosomes. The great commander of Birka, buried with the full honors of a warrior chieftain, was a woman. The discovery sent a shockwave through the field of Viking studies. This wasn't a saga. This wasn't a legend. This was hard, biological proof. Here was a woman who was not a queen, not a princess, but a military leader, acknowledged as such by her community and buried with the highest honors. She didn't have to marry a conqueror or avenge a husband. She was the conqueror. She was the one to whom others would have had to surrender. This single grave reframes everything we've just heard. The stories of Ossa, Ethelfled, and Olga are not just tales of exceptional women who broke the mold. They are glimpses of a world where female power was a real and tangible force, a force so potent that it could lead armies and command fealty. The fate worse than death for a defiant queen wasn't just being forced into marriage or seeing her family killed. The ultimate threat was erasure. It was the attempt by conquerors, and later by historians, to write these women out of the story, to recategorize their power as an anomaly, or to forget it ever existed at all. For over a century, we looked at the evidence in Grave BJ 581, the sword, the horses, the strategist's game board, and we refused to see who was right in front of us. The most effective strategy ever used against the Viking Age's powerful women wasn't an axe. It was our own refusal to believe they were there. The skeletons, however, do not lie.